A winter fairy tale. In a large dense forest, far in the north of Finland, there grew 2 huge pines side by side. They were so old that no one, not even the grey moss, could remember if they had ever been young. Thin pines. Their dark tops could be seen from everywhere. They rose high above the thicket of the forest. In the spring, in the empty branches of old pines, the blackbirds sang cheerful songs in small pink flowers. The heather raised their heads and looked up shyly. Will we be as big and old? When the blizzard covered the land in white, the heather flowers slept under snow. The 2 pines stood guard over the forest. And will we be just as big and just as old? In winter, when the blizzard wrapped the whole land in a white blanket, the heather flowers slept under fluffy snowdrifts. The 2 pines, like 2 giants, stood guard over the forest. The winter storm roared more often, sweeping away the light, the snow, breaking the tops of the trees, and toppling the strong trunks in the winter. The 2 pines, like 2 giants, stood guard over the forest. The winter storm roared more often, sweeping away the light and the snow, breaking the tops of the trees and toppling the strong trunks, and only the giant pines stood firm and straight, and no hurricane could make them bow their heads. The giant pines stood firm, unbowed by hurricanes. At the forest's edge, a small cabin nestled on a hill. They always stood firm, unbowed by hurricanes. And if you are so strong and resilient, it means something. At the edge of the forest, where the old pines grew, there was a small cabin nestled on a little hill, covered with turf, and having 2 small windows that looked out into the forest. In this cabin lived a poor peasant with his wife. She looked into the forest. In this cabin lived a poor peasant with his wife. They had a small piece of land where they sowed grain in a little vegetable garden, and that was all their wealth. And in winter, the peasant worked in the forest. He chopped down trees and hauled logs to the sawmill to save up a few coins for milk and butter. The peasant and his wife had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy was named Sylvester, and the girl was named Sylvia. And where did they find such names for them? Probably in the forest. After all, the word silva, ancient Latin, means forest. Once was winter. Brother and sister, Sylvester and Sylvia, went into the forest to see if any animals had gotten caught in the traps they had set, some forest animal or bird. And indeed, a white hare got caught in one trap, and in the other, a white partridge. Both the hare and the partridge were alive. They had just gotten their paws tangled in the traps and were whimpering pitifully. "Let me go," the hare squeaked as Sylvester approached him. "Let me go," squeaked the partridge as Sylvia leaned over her. Sylvester and Sylvia were very surprised. They had never heard that dreams existed, and that animals and birds could speak like humans. "Let's really let them go," said Sylvia. And together with her brother, she began to carefully untangle the traps. As soon as the hare sensed its freedom, it hopped away into the depths of the forest, and the partridge flew off as fast as it could. How could the wings carry her? "Support the sky. Support the sky. It will do everything you ask for," shouted the hare as it was hopping away. "Ask the clouds to hook you up. Ask clouds to hook you up, and you will have everything you could ever want," the partridge shouted in flight. And once again it became completely quiet in the forest. What were they talking about? Finally Sylvester said, "About which ones?" support the sky and hook the clouds." "And I've never heard of such strange people," said Sylvia. "Who could that be?" At that moment, a strong gust of wind swept through the forest. The tops of the old pines rustled, and in their rustling, Sylvester and Sylvia clearly heard the words. "Well, buddy, are you still standing?" one pine asked another. "Are you still holding up the sky?" It's no wonder the forest animals nicknamed you Podopriniba. "I'm standing, holding it up." Another pine started to hum. "And you, old-timer, are you still fighting the clouds? After all, they don't say a chain of clouds for nothing about you." "I'm feeling a bit weaker," I rustled in response. Today the wind broke off my top branch. It seems that old age really does come. It's wrong for you to complain, you know. After all, it's only 350 years. You're still a child, just a child. But I've already turned 388, and the old pine sighed heavily. "Look, there comes the wind again," whispered the younger pine. "It's so nice to sing songs to his whistling. Let's sing together about the distant past, about our youth. After all, we have plenty to remember. Let's sing together about the distant past, about our youth. After all, you and I have things to remember." And under the noise of the forest storm, the pines swayed and sang their song. "We are bound by the cold, we are in a snowy prison. The blizzard rages and storms in captivity. Under its noise, it lulls us, the ancients, to sleep, and we see the distant past in our dreams. The time when we were two friends." Two young pines rose high above the swaying green of the meadow. Violets bloomed at our feet. They told us about the snow-covered firs, and the clouds flew in from the misty. They gave, and the storm shattered the firs. We reached for the sky from the frozen ground. Not even centuries could bend us, and the whirlwinds dared not break us. Yes, we have things to remember, things to talk about, said the older pine, and it creaked softly. Let's talk to those kids. And one of its branches swayed, as if pointing at Sylvester and Sylvia. What do they want to talk to us about? Sylvester said. Let's go home, Sylvia whispered to her brother. I'm afraid of these trees. Wait, said Sylvester. What is there to be afraid of? Yes, there comes father. And indeed, their father was making his way along the forest path with an axe on his shoulder. These are trees, real trees, just what I need, said the peasant, stopping by the old pines. He had already raised the axe to chop down the older pine, but Sylvester and Sylvia suddenly ran to their father in tears. Father began to ask Sylvester, Don't touch that pine, it supports the sky. Father, don't touch this one either, Sylvia pleaded. Her, imizatsepatucha. They're both so old, and now they're singing us. Little song. What won't the kids come up with? The peasant laughed. Singing trees? Fine, let them stand. For trees to sing. Well, all right, let them stand, since you're asking for them so much. I'll find myself some others. And he went further, into the depths of the forest, while Sylvester and Sylvia stayed by the old pines to hear what these forest giants would say to them. They didn't have to wait long. The wind rustled again in the treetops. He had just been at the mill and was spinning the mill wheels so furiously that sparks from the millstones were raining down in all directions. And now the wind rushed at the pines and began to rage in their branches. The old branches buzzed, rustled, and began to speak. "You saved our lives," said the pines, Sylvester and Sylvia. "So go ahead, ask us for anything you want now." But it turns out it's not always easy to say what you want the most. No matter how much Sylvester and Sylvia thought, they couldn't come up with anything. It was as if they had nothing to wish for. Finally, Sylvester said, "I wish the sun would come out for a little while, because it's completely invisible in the forest. Paths?" "Yes, yes. And I would like spring to come soon and for the snow to melt," said Sylvia. "Then the birds will sing again in the forest." Oh, what reckless children! The pines rustled. "You could have wished for so many wonderful things, like wealth, honors, and fame. You would have had it all. But you're asking for things that would happen even without your request. But there's nothing we can do. We have to fulfill your wish. But we'll do it our way. Listen, Sylvester, wherever you go, whatever you look at, the sun will shine on you everywhere. And your wish, Sylvia, will come true. Wherever you go, whatever you talk about, always. Spring will bloom around you, and the cold snow will melt." "Oh, this is more than we wanted," Sylvester and Sylvia exclaimed. "Thank you, dear pines, for your wonderful gifts. And now, goodbye." And they happily ran home. "Goodbye, goodbye," the old pines rustled after them. On the way, Sylvester kept looking back, searching for partridges. And it's strange, no matter which way he turned. A ray of sunlight flickered everywhere in front of him, sparkling on the branches like gold. Look, the sun has come out," Sylvia shouted to her brother. But as soon as she opened her mouth, the snow all around began to melt. On both sides of the path, the grass turned green. The trees were covered with fresh leaves, and high in the blue sky, the first song of the lark could be heard. Oh, how joyful! Sylvester and Sylvia exclaimed in unison. And the farther they ran, the warmer the sun shone, and the greener the grass and trees became. "The sun is shining on me," Sylvester shouted as he ran into the house. "The sun shines on everyone," said the mother. "And I can melt snow," Sylvia shouted. "But anyone can do that," said the mother, laughing. But after a little while, she noticed that something was wrong in the house. It had already gotten completely dark outside. Evening had come, but in their little house, everything was shining from the bright sun. And so it went on until Sylvester felt sleepy and his eyes closed. But that's not all. There seemed to be no end to winter, and in the little hut, suddenly, a breath of spring blew in. Even the old dried broom in the corner began to turn green, and the rooster on his perch began to crow at the top of his lungs, and he sang until Sylvia got tired of chatting and fell into a deep sleep. Late in the evening, the peasant returned home. "Listen, father," said the wife. "I'm afraid I'm not. Has someone enchanted our children?" "Something wonderful is happening in our house." "Here's something else I thought of," said the peasant. "You better listen, mother, to the news I've brought. You'll never guess. Tomorrow, the king and the queen will arrive in our city in person. They are traveling all over the country to inspect their lands. They are traveling all over the country and inspecting their lands. What do you think? Should we take the kids to see the royal couple?" "Well, I'm all for it," said the wife, "since such important guests don't come to our area every day." The next day, at dawn, the peasant, along with his wife and children, set off on their journey. On the way, the only topic of conversation was the king and queen, and no one noticed that all along the road, a sunbeam was running ahead of the sleds, even though the entire sky was covered with low clouds, and the birch trees around were budding and turning green, despite the frost being so severe that birds were freezing mid-flight. When Sani entered the city square, there were already countless people there. Everyone looked at the road with apprehension and quietly whispered to each other. They said that the king and queen were unhappy with their country. Wherever you go, there's snow and cold everywhere, desolate and wild places. The king, as befits him, was very strict. He immediately decided that his people were to blame for everything and was going to punish everyone properly. They said that the queen was very cold, and to warm up she kept stomping her feet, and finally, in the distance, the queen's sleds appeared. The crowd froze. And finally, in the distance, the queen's sleds appeared. The crowd froze. In the square, the king ordered the coachman to stop in order to change the horses. The king sat there, his heart furrowed with a frown, while the queen was crying bitterly. And suddenly the king lifted his head, looked around, back and forth, and laughed joyfully, just like everyone else does. "Look, Your Majesty," he said to the queen, "how warmly the sun is shining. Honestly, it's not so bad here after all. For some reason, I even started to feel cheerful. It's probably because you had a good breakfast," said the queen. "However, I also started to feel a bit cheerier." "That's probably why. It's because Your Majesty had a good sleep," said the king. "But however, this desert country is very beautiful. Look how brightly the sun lights up those 2 pines over there in the distance. This is a lovely place. I will order a palace to be built here." Yes, we definitely need to build a palace here," the queen agreed, and she even stopped stomping her feet for a moment. "Overall, it's not bad here at all. Everywhere there's snow, and the trees and bushes are covered with green leaves, like in May. That's just incredible." But there was nothing incredible about it. Sylvester and Sylvia just climbed up on the hill to get a better look at the king and the queen. Sylvester was spinning around in all directions. That's why the sun was shining all around, and Sylvia was chattering away, not closing her mouth for a second. That's why even the dry poles of the old fence were covered with fresh leaves. "What lovely children are those?" the queen asked, looking at Sylvester and Sylvia. "Let them come to me." Sylvester and Sylvia, they had never dealt with crowned individuals before, so they boldly approached the king and queen. "Listen," said the queen, "I really like you. When I look at you, I feel happier and even a bit warmer. Do you want to live with me in the palace? I will order you to be dressed in velvet and gold. You will eat from crystal plates and drink from silver cups. So do you agree?" "Thank you, Your Majesty," said Sylvia. "We'd be better off staying home." Besides, we'll miss our friends in the palace, said Sylvester. Can't we take them to the palace too? The king asked. She was in a great mood and wasn't at all angry that they were disagreeing with her. No, that's impossible, replied Sylvester and Sylvia. They grow in the forest. They are called to prop up the sky and catch the cloud, whatever comes to mind. Children, cried the king and the queen in one voice. And they laughed so loudly that even the royal sleigh began to jump in place. The king ordered the horses to be unhitched, and the stonemasons and carpenters immediately began to build the new palace. Strangely enough, this time the king and queen were kind and gracious to everyone. They didn't punish anyone and even ordered their treasurer to give everyone a gold coin. And Sylvester and Sylvia received in addition a pretzel that was baked by the royal baker himself. The pretzel was so big that a team of 4 royal horses carried it on separate sleds. Sylvester and Sylvia treated all the kids in the square to a pretzel, and yet there was still such a big piece left that it barely fit on the sled. On the way back, the peasant's wife whispered to her husband, "Do you know why the king and queen were so gracious today?" Because Sylvester and Sylvia were looking at them and talking to them. Remember what I told you yesterday? Is it about witchcraft? The farmer said. Empty. Yes, just think about it. The wife wouldn't back down. Where have you ever seen trees blooming in winter, and the king and queen not punishing anyone? You have to believe me, there was definitely some witchcraft involved here. It's all just women's nonsense, said the farmer. It's just that our kids are good. Everyone is happy with them, looking... And indeed, wherever Sylvester and Sylvia went, and whoever they spoke to, everyone immediately felt warmer and brighter inside. And since Sylvester and Sylvia were always cheerful and friendly, no one was surprised that they brought joy to everyone. Everything around them was blooming and green, that they bring joy to everyone. Sylvester and Sylvia's land bloomed, birds sang. It sang and laughed. The barren lands around the little house where Sylvester and Sylvia lived turned into rich fields and meadows, and even in the forest, spring birds sang in winter. Soon, Sylvester was appointed the royal page, and Sylvia became the royal gardener. No king in any kingdom ever had such a wonderful garden. And it's no wonder, since no king could command the sun to obey his orders. But Sylvester and Sylvia could make the sun shine whenever they wanted. That's why everything in their garden bloomed so beautifully that it was a joy to behold. Several years passed. One cold winter day, Sylvester and Sylvia went into the forest to visit their friends. A storm was raging in the forest. The wind howled in the dark treetops, and under its noise, the pines sang their song. We stand as we used to, strong and tall. Sometimes the snow falls, sometimes it melts. And we see 2 friends, 2 old pines, as the greenery of spring changes again, the snow white as ermine, as clouds pass by full of rain, and flocks of birds rush by. The pine needles are fresh and thick, envy the elms and hornbeams. Winter will leave you not a single leaf, it will scatter your green attire, but the pines are granted eternal beauty. Their roots went deep into the underground, while their tall crowns reached the sky. Let the bad weather rage all around, neither the storm nor the pine will fall. But they didn't have time to finish their songs, as something crackled and creaked inside the trunks. Both pines fell to the ground. On that very day, the younger one turned 355 years old, and the older one was 393. What's so surprising about the winds finally overcoming them? Sylvester and Sylvia gently patted the gray moss-covered trunks of the dead pines and remembered their friends with such kind words. Why has the snow started to melt all around? And the pink flowers of heather burst forth from the ground. And there were so many of them that soon they covered the old pines from the very roots to the very tops. I haven't heard anything about Sylvester and Sylvia for a long time. They've probably grown old themselves and settled down now. But the king and queen, whom everyone was so afraid of, are no longer in this world. But every time I see children, I feel like it's Sylvester and Sylvia. Maybe the old pines blessed all the children living in the world with their wonderful gifts. Maybe so. Recently, on a gloomy, rainy day, I came across a boy and a girl, and suddenly a ray of sunshine seemed to flicker in the gray, dull sky. Everything around brightened up, and smiles appeared on the gloomy faces of passers-by. That's when, in the middle of winter, spring arrives. That's when the ice starts to melt on the windows and in people's hearts. Then, even the old broom in the corner gets covered with fresh leaves. Roses bloom on the dry thicket, and cheerful larks sing under the high arch of the sky.